Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Wrestling Guardians podcast. This is episode 2 of our new podcast series. Hope everybody is doing well out there, staying safe. How are you, Anir? Everything good your end?
So far so good, Dan. I hope you and your family are keeping well, and I wish our listeners the best of health, and hopefully we'll have some interesting conversation about the goings on in pro wrestling.
Yep, hopefully. So, a couple of things I think this week that are worth some discussion. Particularly some interesting quotes that have been said by different people throughout the wrestling business. First thing I wanted to bring up, so I think Cody was being interviewed and they were discussing his current character in AEW. And essentially the question was put to him, would you consider what you're doing at the moment to be sort of babyface or heel? And he essentially kind of responded by saying that, the whole idea of face and heel in wrestling is a bit of an old, sort of tired trope, I think was the words he used. And I think that's just an interesting point to discuss here, actually. I just wondered, what our thoughts are around that. Do you kind of agree? Like, do you think wrestling today has changed to the point where we don't need the heel and face dynamic anymore, or what?
No, I don't think so, Dan. I think pro wrestling at its core needs to be simple. There has to be a baby face and there has to be a heel. I mean, at times the baby faces can display heel mannerisms and vice versa, but at the end of the day there still has to be someone that the audience is rooting for and is invested in, and that's the only way professional wrestling really works. If you go back to the most successful angles in the history of professional wrestling, there's always a heel and always a baby face. Some of the great builds to pro wrestling feuds in recent times have always had a definitive baby face and a heel. If you don't have that babyface heel element to it, I think what you end up getting is just a mess.
Yeah, I think I largely agree. I think, in a way, I mean, I don't fully disagree with what Cody's saying, but I think what he's getting at, or what I kind of expect he's getting at more, is this kind of the thing that WWE have been doing for a lot over the last sort of 10 years or so, of kind of just telling fans, right, this is a babyface, this is a heel, just act accordingly. And I think fans do get tired of that, and they kind of see through that, and I think that's where a lot of the problems kind of arise from. Because I guess in today's wrestling, I think it is quite difficult to be a heel, because it's almost like if you're too good at it, then you'll eventually just turn yourself face anyway, because people will start kind of respecting you and kind of liking the stuff that you're saying. Classic example of that, I think, like Kevin Owens in the, sort of the last sort of few years has been a really good example of that. He's supposed to be, or he's mainly presented as a heel when he first came up to the main roster, but people just recognise that he's pretty good on the mic and has quite an interesting sort of character to him. And you just sit there and think, I don't really want to boo this guy, because I quite like the work he does. So then you kind of just get left with these heels like Baron Corbin, who I think, like, that's more the kind of, I don't like you, I don't want you to be in this position type of heel, which isn't really what you're going for. Like, you want people to dislike you because of the things you say, not just because you're kind of like a mediocre talent, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely does make sense. But then, so what I'd like to say is, I mean, for example, let's say you have a heel who's doing well, and the audience starts to like him. You don't need to change any of his mannerisms or anything like that. He can still work as a babyface by doing the things that he was still doing as a heel. What you just need to do is make sure that his opponents are also then start to become heels, if that makes any sense. He can't all of a sudden start pandering to the audience and start becoming like this sort of naive character, because it just doesn't work. That's not why the audience believed in him to begin with. So if that's what Cody means, in the sense that you don't need to be like a traditional sort of baby face, then I could agree with him. But again, there always has to be a character that the audience can get invested in and a character that the audience can despise. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah. Again, I think that's true. Like maybe the problem then is more to do with the like how things are presented. Especially this is a big WWE problem over the years. They know who they want to push as their sort of main baby faces, because they're sort of profitable, I guess, to a certain extent, and they kind of appeal to a wide audience, especially sort of the younger fans. So Cena, the number one babyface on paper, at least, for the WWE for so long. And the problem is then you get people like Kevin Owens, who people want to cheer for, who will kind of go up against Cena as the villain in the feud. And then the whole kind of WWE machine, like the commentators, everything is kind of presented as John Cena as the babyface, which goes against a big sort of vocal part of the audience. That's when you get this really awkward sort of feel to wrestling, where the heel has been cheered and the face has been booed and stuff. So I don't know, like, are we kind of entering into a phase where it's like wrestlers just kind of do what they do and the fans kind of just go with it? Or like, I don't know, how do you change that? Do you make the commentary team more neutral and maybe not kind of be so obvious about who the good guy's supposed to be? Or I don't know how you get around that, really.
So then I think you need to be flexible to begin with. If the audience is warming up to somebody, you can't just give them the stop-start treatment. Like, you sort of have to go all the way with that guy, and you have to make sure that you don't strip away the elements of the character that made him appealing to begin with. If you do and you change up his presentation completely, then the audience is going to turn on him. So, for example, if you look at Dean Ambrose with the WWE, there was a period when it looked like he was going to be the breakout guy from the Shield because he had a sort of unique charisma and he was good on promos and stuff like that. And WWE just sort of decided to put their own spin on him. And what Dean Ambrose ended up being was this sort of pathetic, goofy character. And then nobody liked him when he became champion, and then his title run just failed. Some of this you could also put down to Dean Ambrose's work ethic and whatever. But the point being, if you keep the character consistent and make it something that the fans can believe in, they will.
Yeah. I think also, the temptation is to blame like the creative team, which and I think they do bear a lot of the brunt of this problem. But I do think there are some guys, and I think Ambrose kind of fits into this as well. But again, I'm using Kevin Owens again as an example. But he's supposed to be a heel, and he's told by his employers, you're a heel at the moment. This is what we kind of want you to do and say. And then the fans decide, oh no, we like what he's doing and saying, so we're going to start cheering for him. Like, is it the wrestler's responsibility to kind of try and fight against that? Because when I look at guys like Kevin Owens and other people like him, there doesn't seem to be any kind of effort to really try and be a heel. They just kind of keep doing what they're doing and kind of like the fact that they're being cheered for it. Whereas, because I think, a perfect example of somebody who did it right recently was Daniel Bryan. Because if you think, 2013 Daniel Bryan, the most popular babyface in the whole industry. Fast forward to kind of a couple of years ago, the whole sort of Planet Champion heel Daniel Bryan, and he was getting legitimate boos from what he was saying, and that's because I think he kind of figured out, what's going to make me unpopular, what are the kind of things that I have to say to get people to boo me, So I think it's down to the wrestler as well to kind of put that effort in, maybe.
But then, in the WWE system specifically, it doesn't look like the wrestlers have that much creative input, no? They're basically just handed a script and told to recite a bunch of lines, and most of them are bad at doing that because they're not actors, they're professional wrestlers, and their craft is improv and reacting to a live audience. So, I'm not sure they actually have, the ability to sort of do what we're talking about. Some people like Daniel Bryan, who probably do have leeway with their own creative and stuff like that, can do anything they want, as you very rightly said. But I don't think the vast majority of wrestlers just have that option.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. And I think, there's different sort of levels to, sort of how much influence you have in the company. So, Daniel Bryan compared to Kevin Owens probably has a lot more of that kind of creative input into his character. But then again, it's possible that, the creative team kind of looked at Bryan and think, okay, how do we make you a heel? Well, what is it about you that people might not like? Well, you're a vegan environmentalist, like maybe we can sort of turn that up to 11 and just kind of, get you sort of administering, telling people that they're, doing X, Y, and Z to the planet or whatever. but then it's still something about the way he delivers the lines that gets it over. Like wrestlers who are sort of confined to these boxes that the creative team put them in. If they had something about them that genuinely caught the audience's imagination, then maybe the creative team will start looking at them as someone who maybe deserves a bit more creative control over their character. Some people might be using it as a bit of an excuse to go, oh, well, I can't do what I want to do because the creative team's saying I need to do this. And it's like, well, is it really there in you anyway?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I mean, some people might just not be capable of, expressing their creativity. But at the same point, I mean, are these guys sort of trained to memorize lines and deliver them? That's sort of what an actor does. No, I mean, I think you could sort of get into a situation where a lot of these guys are just worried about not forgetting their lines, and they can't actually express whatever the promo is meant to convey to the audience.
Yeah. Or, sort of saying something that they're not supposed to say as well, giving them the long list of banned words they're supposed to avoid as well.
Totally. And as you said, I mean, there's also probably like an issue of just motivation.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and if you look at the real kind of the CM Punk example was I think is what kind of started a lot of this. It took somebody to actively be portrayed as someone who was breaking out of that kind of ceiling that the creative team put on him for him to become popular, and that kind of says so much about the wrestling business at the moment. And it's almost like a sort of a controlled anarchy almost. It's like you can be portrayed as the renegade, but only within the confines of what we're allowing you to do.
Absolutely. I mean, WWE's creative process doesn't sound like something that's very fun to be a part of.
No, not particularly. And I think as well, like the diversity maybe of the wrestling audience base at the moment is maybe a bit of a problem, because the whole I think all that gets embodied in the kind of "Let's go Cena sucks" chants. The fact that it's the younger fans saying one thing and the older fans saying the other, and it's very difficult, I think, to be able to kind of appeal to both. Like almost impossible, I think, these days to appeal to like literally everybody.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's true. I can't argue that.
Yeah. Whereas I guess you had more like back in the day when there was, cause the NWA was always seen as like the kind of like the grown up kind of wrestling. To the older fans, whereas WWE was more kind of like the cartoonish kids version. So you could kind of you could put your baby faces in place in the WWE and the NWA, whereas now it's all WWE. Some AEW fans might object to that, but it has been all WWE for so long now that it's just really difficult to kind of cram everybody in, I guess.
Right, yeah, that's true. But then the thing with the AEW fans is, while WWE, at least we can say, is bad professional wrestling, AEW is just poor gymnastics.
Yeah, I wondered how long it would take for us to get back to this point. although saying that, and this is one of the makers of ironic things about what Cody said, is that AEW probably has the best heel in the industry at the moment in MJF. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. His promo this week was excellent.
It was so good. And that's why, like, so he is a really good example of what I've kind of been talking about. Is like that heel that people respect him, but they still want to boo him. And that's a real like rare talent at the moment to have, because he's saying the things that I think are kind of hitting the nerves of a lot of people in the wrestling industry at the moment. He basically Moxley's doing some poor imitation of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and it's not wrestling anymore, it's just gymnastics and contrived movesets, and he's sort of hitting on a lot of home truths, which people are recognizing and don't necessarily want to agree with, but they kind of know it's true. Like that's genuine heel work, I think, for me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think Ciampa had something, did something similar to this during his feud with Johnny Gargano, where Everybody who was at that who was at Full Sail University legitimately wanted to assault him. But he wasn't Baron Corbin. He was an excellent professional wrestler who was just doing such a great job. So yeah, full kudos to MJF.
I think another example was would be Randy Orton. I think as well. Like, I don't think he gets enough credit, but because he can be very effective when he's sort of booked in the right way as a babyface. But his heel work, I think, is tremendous because again he knows what is going to piss people off, and that's where he'll go with it. And again, that goes back to the fact that some people have more kind of creative control. So Randy Orton is definitely one of those people that you would expect to have more of a say in kind of what he's allowed to say and allowed to do. But yeah, I think his Twitter feud with Ciampa this year or wherever it was fantastic.
But Randy Orton also has that sort of that WWE chosen one coating on him. So the fans aren't as quick to sort of take to him as a cool heel as well. So that sort of does help.
Yeah, he was the perfect opponent for the Daniel Bryan versus Authority story angle because you can definitely believe he is someone who is kind of handpicked by the McMahons to sort of lead their company, and that really worked. It always makes you cringe when they try and put other people in that Daniel Bryan position. Like I think they even tried to do that with Roman Reigns at one point. He was the person that Vince didn't want as champion. You think that there's no way I'm going to believe that, so I'm not going to get invested in this at all.
Exactly. Nobody believes in Roman Reigns as sort of this guy who's fighting from underneath.
No, definitely not. They should just be honest and just portray him as what he's supposed to be. He's got a great sort of pedigree behind him. He's got a great look and can put on a half decent match when he's kind of required to. There's no need to kind of portray him as this sort of underdog character that's fighting against authority. It's just ridiculous. Exactly. Yeah, not everybody's going to be Stone Cold Steve Austin.
But then the thing is, even in modern times, I think the Stone Cold Steve Austin as the underdog thing would work because in many ways, he was the guy who failed multiple times at different companies, and he was on the brink of failure in WWE until he had the change of gimmick at the last moment, and that even came along by crazy coincidence. So that's a much more believable story than than this sort of all-American NFL football player who Vince McMahon's wanted to make new Rock from day one, being the underdog.
Do you think the Stone Cold gimmick would work today? Because it is very anti-authority, but in a more kind of like violent way. Like most of the time he would always get one up on Vince McMahon, whereas today's sort of example of that would be kind of like a Daniel Bryan who's fighting against the kind of big corporate machine. I don't know whether it would work today if you had the sort of the renegade babyface kind of get the upper hand that many times, maybe.
I think a lot of these angles don't work anymore just because the babyface doesn't get the upper hand often enough. So you sort of stop believing in him and you sort of just tune out mentally. And another thing is, it was the guy playing the character, and I'm not talking about Steve Austin the performer per se. It was just that Steve Austin had a read on why people cared about the character, and he shot down ideas that were detrimental to his character. I don't think people in WWE have the influence to do that, and even if they do, it's unlikely that they have that kind of feel for what makes them tick. Like John Cena notoriously was terrible at shooting down creative decisions, even though he made a lot of money for the company.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think a lot of the stuff Steve Austin did wouldn't work today just because it wasn't very PC?
But I think it depends really, because I think the way Vince McMahon portrayed himself as the villain was sort of so instrumental to making that Stone Cold character work as well. All you have to do is kind of bring in some kind of like villain character that's like loosely based on Donald Trump, and then anyone who goes against him would be instantly popular with like that kind of new generation of like woke left-wing fan.
Do you remember the faction Uncensored? Forgive me, I don't think the name of the faction is Uncensored. I just can't recall at the moment.
Right to Censor.
Right to Censor, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I do remember. Yes, that they were very, very effective. Again, like a really good way of, that's when heel work really works for me. Is when, like the creative team have their finger on the pulse in terms of what's betrayed in sort of that society as undesirable. So like, over censorship of things, so people don't like that, so let's make a good character out of that. I think another really good heel character that I don't think gets as talked about enough is IRS, because again, everybody hates the IRS, everybody hates paying taxes and people kind of overseeing what they're doing financially, so why not make a character out of that, and then when you get that combination of like the great gimmick and the great performer to do that gimmick, that's when sort of magic happens.
I agree. IRS was a very underrated hero.
So there was again, just going back to kind of a few things that have been said over the week or so. Seth Rollins has recently come out and said, this is the exact quote: "So from coast to coast and sea to sea, I don't know if there's ever been this much incredible wrestling going on at one time. Taking nothing away from past generations, they inspired and paved the way, but we're damn sure keeping up, and then some." So I just wondered what your initial thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so I think what Seth Rollins means is that there's plenty of gymnastics going on in wrestling rings all over the world. And if your idea of professional wrestling is watching people do 10 somersaults in a row, then sure, there is better professional wrestling going on around any point than in any other point of time. But if you're interested in stories and compelling characters and things like that, professional wrestling is in the same place it has been in since 2001.
I think what I take issue mostly with that quote is the bit where he says that the past generations inspired and paved the way for the current generation. I think if you went back to the Attitude Era and kind of showed the guys what they were paving the way for, they'd probably just stop what they were doing and go straight home.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think you could say the same thing about the Hulk Hogan generation. I mean, if you showed them stuff going on in the Attitude Era, they'd probably react the same way.
Yeah, but at least they'd be able to kind of point to the viewer figures and go, well, it's obviously working. Whereas you can't really do that today.
Yeah. People tuning out at rapid rates, and Seth Rollins is like, oh, we're doing the best work we've ever done. That's what we need more of. We need eye for an eye matches.
Absolutely, yeah. That's going to bring the viewers back in droves, I think.
Yeah. I think Seth's compelling television more than a fucking man's eye rolling around on the floor.
But I guess, on one level, you can't really blame him for saying things like this, because, of course, you're going to sort of speak positively about your current era. You wouldn't expect him to come out and say, well, wrestling is utter crap at the minute, and I wish I was born sort of 30 years ago. But then it just seems so kind of against what I think any kind of intelligent wrestling fan sees, that it's almost insulting, I guess, to hear him say that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's someone who's not paying attention. But then, I mean, what is Seth Rollins going to say? I mean, he can't come out and say pro wrestling was better 20 years ago. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although we did put in this tweet #the Golden Age. I don't know what's gold about this current age, but
these guys think professional wrestling, like if people like Seth Rollins and Kenny Omega had their way, they would have judges sitting at ringside awarding them points for their flips and dives and all of that stuff. You get a 10 for your 10th tope suicide of the evening.
I think, I think they try and sort of live up to certain like chants from fans. So like, you always expect to see "This is awesome," "Fight forever" is another one. There's these various sort of chants that they're in a way, I guess, the same as sort of holding up scorecards. But when you hear "This is awesome" and "Fight forever" in every match, it just loses its potency very quickly.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think we can both safely say that we disagree with Seth Rollins on this then.
Yeah, I think Seth Rollins has just completely lost perspective on what professional wrestling is. I mean, in professional wrestling, what you're essentially doing is telling a story, and each week you write a new chapter in this story, and ultimately the final chapter of that story is a wrestling match at a pay per view. What Seth Rollins' idea of professional wrestling is, like you said, doing a variety of monkey flips until the audience starts chanting, "This is awesome," because it's a Pavlovian sort of reaction for the audience.
Do you I always feel like Seth Rollins is like, even in, within the confines of this generation, I think he's vastly overrated personally. Like, I think his best days, early days of the Shield, and then his kind of feud with Ambrose after they split up, I think were kind of his sort of highlights from his career. But he's just someone that I just find incredibly annoying as a babyface, and then even as a heel, just someone who really needs that right opponent to be with in order for him to shine. Like, he's by no means this generation's Triple H or Shawn Michaels. Like, I don't know if you'd agree with that.
No, he certainly isn't. He certainly isn't this generation's Triple H or Shawn Michaels. But then again, this generation isn't exactly littered with outstanding careers. Would you say that Daniel Bryan comes from this, is part of the same generation as Seth Rollins, or one generation prior?
I think they'd probably be, given the popularity of Daniel Bryan, because obviously he was around for a long time. Even in WWE, he was around for a period of time where he wasn't really like breaking into anything higher than like the mid card. So the kind of the cult of Daniel Bryan, I guess, kind of coincided with the Shield. So I guess you could say they're from the same generation.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking post Cena, I mean, at least in my mind, the two standout guys are probably Daniel Bryan and CM Punk.
Yeah, I think I have much more respect, I guess, for Daniel Bryan. Like, if anyone was to say, is there a genuine sort of breakout kind of superstar of this generation, I think I'd say Daniel Bryan, because he has a great, like, his work rate alone is obviously something that a lot of people recognise, and that's really great. But I think he genuinely gets the business as well. Going back to some of the things we were saying about his heel work, someone who is able to garner that much kind of heel heat and babyface reaction within a few years of each other has to be seen as someone who, is a bona fide professional wrestler. I think Daniel Bryan in like the territory days, I think would have been a really good thing to see, because I just think he just gets it, and he's sort of in it for the business rather than in it for himself, which I think is a lot of the current superstars are at the moment.
Right, and when initially Daniel Bryan came along to the WWE, obviously he had good instinct and he was still a good promo and stuff. But I think in recent years, like, he sort of developed into like a real standout, iconic mic artist.
Yeah. His mic work improved dramatically, but he didn't really need to do much, I guess, in the height of that sort of Daniel Bryan versus Authority story angle. He didn't need to say much, because anything he said, I think, would have been received really well. But then, again, when he's asked to be the heel, I think that's when his mic work really sort of stands out. I remember the sort of the run he had just before, when he was World Heavyweight Champion and he had AJ as his sort of on-screen girlfriend. I think some of the stuff he was doing then was tremendous as well. Like, you genuinely wanted to see somebody kick the crap out of him because he was being such a dick to AJ. And then to become that sort of beloved babyface a few years later is just really great.
Yeah, I mean, there were times, especially when he was sort of the environmentalist champion, I DVR'd SmackDown just to watch this guy's promos. I mean, that was the only thing I really cared about on the show.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, because he was sort of connecting with something that was going on in wider society, he was sort of recognising that trying to work out what I can say that people aren't going to like, and what's going to sort of touch a nerve. Whereas you look at other heel characters, and it's like when they turn from heel to babyface, or the other way around, nothing really changes. They just kind of keep doing what they're doing, and that's not good character work. That's just kind of selling yourself as a commodity. Um, like, do you think that maybe is one of the sort of the effects of like the rise of like independent wrestling over recent years? Because as an independent wrestler, obviously you have to rest on your own laurels, and it's all about self promotion and getting yourself over, to the point where someone hopefully notices you. If you put so many of those guys on the main stage like WWE and AEW, they keep doing that, and they don't have that kind of like selfless quality about them to understand what's good for the business as a whole.
Yeah. See, Dan, I don't really know, because the guys who aren't in independent wrestling and just come through the WWE sort of feeder system just don't have the ability to think on their feet and are deprived of any sort of creativity. I mean, I don't want to generalize, but I think that seems to be the case for a lot of them. Like, if you look at somebody like Ryback, I don't really know what he has to offer the wrestling business. So it certainly is a tricky one, and you might have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Because we did get people like AJ Styles, I mean, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan from the indie scene as well. So.
Yeah, I guess so.
And especially in the absence of the territories and everything, that's the closest thing you get to exposure from a professional wrestling perspective in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, of course, you've got AEW now, and that's seemingly they just allow you to do whatever the hell you want, even if it's terrible. Like this whole Cody sort of open challenge sort of TNT championship thing. You're seeing a lot of these people that managed to get themselves somewhat over on the internet starting to come through, and it's like just instantly being exposed as completely green and not compelling at all.
Well, I mean, funnily enough, I think Cody Rhodes might actually know. He might have a better feel for pro wrestling than a lot of the other guys at AEW, but he just seems to be content to keep a happy locker room and whatever.
I mean, I didn't mind his the whole Eddie Kingston match was pretty good, and I've seen Eddie Kingston, some of his work on NWA, but I don't know that much about him. But yeah, like, who was this like weirdo that he fought this week, Warhorse? Like, I don't know who he is. I don't want to know who he is. I don't want to see him anymore in a wrestling ring.
I believe it was Warhorse, yes.
Yeah. And I think another sort of newsworthy thing that was said this week came from Jon Moxley, who essentially called Vince McMahon a madman. Basically, kind of confirmed what a lot of people have been sort of thinking about the idea of scripted promos and everything. I think that was a big part of his Jon Moxley character, was that he was unchained, and he's sort of broken out of that kind of world where he was told to say what to say and told not what not to say. And I think again I would largely kind of agree with kind of Jon Moxley's sort of sentiment there. I think scripted promos across the board are a bad idea. They kind of keep genuinely talented stars from getting over, and they kind of maybe like hide some of the sort of the limitations of other wrestlers as well, and kind of keep them in a position where they really shouldn't be, maybe.
Yeah. I think I'd agree with you there. I mean, you can't put shackles on guys who can express themselves creatively, but there might be people who do need assistance.
Yeah, it's kind of seeing people who kind of have that potential, and it's like, if we were to kind of work with them long enough, then yeah, like they could get to a level where they could maybe get themselves over with promo work. But unfortunately, wrestling is a business where you need to do both, and I think this kind of overemphasis on in-ring work at the moment is meaning that a lot of guys are getting into kind of main event situations where they can't talk themselves out of a paper bag, and it's really letting the industry down, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Because at the end of the day, I mean, weekly television in pro wrestling is about the promos, right? I mean, you talk people into the building. That's how you get the job done. And Yeah. It certainly is. I mean, if you look at people like Kenny Omega and stuff like that, I mean, these guys are not outstanding promos. I mean, these are the most celebrated wrestlers of the modern day, and none of them can talk people into a building. That's certainly a massive flaw in today's landscape.
Do you think? So I think what the elite in particular have tried to do is kind of that promotion side of wrestling, of talking people into the building. They've tried to kind of bring that into like their YouTube channel, which is maybe them kind of going to something that they're more familiar with and maybe kind of trying to build things up that way. But I don't know, I think the problem with that is that I don't think that many people are really interested and don't really want to spend any more time like searching through YouTube to like find out, why they should care about wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, your television show literally, I mean, well, I guess now it is your main mode of revenue, but in principle, your television show does exist for you to promote your product, so that's what you should be using it to do. Not giving people like JP Warhorse time to stink up the ring.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was some episode of Being the Elite or whatever the hell it's called where they talked about it, but like I'm not gonna sit there and watch that. like I have 2 hours a week where I'll dedicate to watching AEW, even though sometimes I don't know why I do that to myself, but like that is your 2 hours to tell me why I should care about this guy, why I should care about this guy. Like I say, you have 2 hours a week to tell me why I should care about your product, and if you can't do it in that 2 hours, then I'm not going to put the work in to try and find it elsewhere. I'm sorry. Do you think there's a problem as well with like the differentiation with the weekly episodic shows and sort of pay-per-view? I know, pay-per-view is a bit of an outdated term now, but like that kind of special attraction show, I think that's what's missing as well from the current wrestling business. It's the fact that they can just give you like Photo Fest or Fight for the Fallen for free on a Wednesday when Dynamite's supposed to be. That's like really undercutting the importance of kind of building up to genuine kind of big fight feel pay-per-views the way they used to do back in the day. I don't think that's something they do as well anymore.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, that whole aspect of the slow build is completely gone from wrestling, right? I mean, the closest thing I can remember to that slow build is probably the Triple H Batista feud a few years ago, and then I think the answer is probably to do fewer pay-per-views than both companies, than WWE especially puts out now, but if they don't have a destination to go anywhere within 4 weeks, I find that their creative becomes very stifled. So
yeah, it's, I think maybe not necessarily having fewer pay-per-views, but just having fewer pay-per-views where like the main title is contended.
But possibly,
yeah. Like I really wouldn't mind if the the actual WWE Championship was only defended like 4 or 5 times a year. Like I think that would be much better, because you would get that sort of genuine excitement about, oh wow, it's a championship match, and like,
so are you advocating for another Brock Lesnar title run?
No, I mean, the title still needs to be presented on TV regularly so you can see it, but like just limit the amount of times it's actually sort of fought over, because like if you think about back in the day and like the prestige and the importance of the World Heavyweight Championship back when Flair held it, and then you fast forward today and it's like the AEW Championship is just fought randomly against Brian Cage, who literally has been in the company 2 weeks and is completely green in the ring, and it's like it completely devalues the championship itself.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's the big thing pro wrestling has to deal with now. I mean, the overdose of content.
But it's not like they haven't got the it's not like demand is higher than the supply, because there's plenty of wrestlers out there that they could afford. You could build a pay-per-view just around like the tag team belts or the North American Championship over in NXT. Like you don't always have to finish every single pay-per-view with the World Championship.
I agree. I totally agree.
Especially now that you've got the network. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like it's $9.99 a month, sort of flat rate. So it doesn't really matter as much if nobody sort of buys nobody wants to see that particular pay-per-view because you've already paid your monthly subscription anyway. Back in the day when it was all about how many people bought the pay-per-view, I could get that, but
Yeah, and maybe if you are headlining a pay-per-view with the tag team championships, then people will care more about those titles and the performers and stuff like that, and then you can really sink your teeth into that storyline and make that mean something as well.
Yeah.
For example, if you look at the UFC, it's not like every single championship they have is defended on every pay-per-view. And they'll have like two title matches on a pay-per-view at most.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a really good model to kind of base on at the moment. Actually, is if you were to really put the time and effort into building up a really good like Intercontinental and Championship feud, and then have that main event like a pay-per-view like Extreme Rules or something, like you're telling the fans, this is a big deal, like we want you to care about the IC Championship, we want you to care about the two guys that were involved in it, rather than just kind of have everything else as filler and then just think of some half decent feud for the main championship belt.
Agreed, I agree.
I think it would be if you did go with the tag team championships as the main event, just the novelty of having one tag team versus another tag team would be great, rather than 18-man tag matches involving the whole bloody roster of like I wanted to bring this up with you actually, because last week you were very you had a lot of praise for Chris Jericho, which I totally understand, but then tune into AEW this week and he's involved in one of these ridiculous 10-man tag team matches and you think, what the hell has happened to you? I don't know if I can forgive him for what he did this week with that train wreck of a match just to open AEW.
Yeah, that certainly wasn't anything to be proud of.
Oh, it was appalling. And like the main sort of gimmick of that match was Marco Stunt, who wasn't even an active competitor in it, I don't think. He'd just been thrown around by people.
Apparently that's what pro wrestling is in 2020, watching Marco Stunt be a pinball.
Yeah, they've just lost. There's so many sort of different sort of combinations of different tag matches and tag teams they've put together into some ridiculous multi-man match that I don't even know who I'm supposed to be caring about anymore. Is it still Young Bucks and FTR? Are they still the main attraction or what? Like, I don't, there has to be some kind of structure to it all.
I really thought they had the potential to do like a sort of old school war game style match with the Elite and Jericho's faction, the Inner Circle, but it ended up being the Stadium Stampede or whatever that hot mess was.
Yeah, it goes back to that thing I said last week. I think a lot of people in the sort of creative team in both companies actually are kind of praising the fact that COVID-19 happened, because they're like, oh, finally we can do these ridiculous cinematic matches that we've always wanted to do, that we were never allowed to do before.
And I think we've had a grand total of like 2 palatable cinematic matches throughout the wrestling business.
And they were both like the first 2 as well.
Yeah. Is anybody surprised that AEW's version of a cinematic match has Sammy Guevara fucking flying off Rose End of a football stadium?
No, or somebody changing their character after they get their head dunked into a swimming pool.
Yeah.
It's indie wrestling on a big stage. That's all it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is Matt Hardy obsessed with like bringing out so many different sides of his character? Just pick one and play it. Like at this point, he's worse than the Big Show for me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think he found something that worked for a while, and then just decided to just like milk every sort of ounce of credibility that was left in his character. And like the Broken Matt Hardy thing worked for a while and it was popular, but it never should have found its way onto a main stage like AEW or WWE.
So Dan, the thing is, I think we need a sort of happy medium when it comes to wrestlers' input on creative and pro wrestling, because when you sort of starve them of any input and you just sort of write scripts for them, you get the WWE product. And when you let them when you let the inmates run the asylum, it either becomes AEW or WCW.
Yeah, that's that's a really good categorization of it, actually. Yeah. And again, it's no surprise that the best sort of eras of the industry were when that sort of happened. When you had a bit of a back and forth between sort of genuinely like intelligent creative talent and also the creative team that were able to kind of put it into practice. But even then, I mean, even during the heights of the Attitude Era, the Hogan Era, you still had these sort of huge egos, and every now and then you'd get somebody who was somehow able to kind of bend the ear of Vince McMahon. Shawn Michaels in the 90s was a perfect example of that. Someone who definitely got the business and was very talented in the ring, but you give him too much control over things, and things start to deteriorate very quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
I just wanted to finish up just by discussing something that I think has caught a lot of people's attention, is the Fiend attacking Alexa Bliss, and what they could potentially do with the Alexa Bliss character going forward. I think that's something that's genuinely different. We're sort of used to seeing the Fiend kind of attack various kind of male competitors, but seeing him go after someone like Alexa Bliss, and there's been talk in the past about Alexa Bliss being the kind of Sister Abigail type character to kind of Bray Wyatt's gimmick. Is that something that you would welcome?
So Dan, I don't know, because Alexa Bliss did make a cameo in the Swamp fight, as you well remember, and I thought that was just something that was meant to be playing out in Braun Strowman's head, because that character did have a relationship with Alexa Bliss in the past. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's so So I don't know. Maybe this is the Fiend sort of getting to to Braun Strowman through Alexa Bliss, but then I don't know how comfortable I feel about putting a talented performer such as Alexa Bliss in the damsel in distress role, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that was my initial thought when I saw it. It's like, oh, they're just they're trying to get people to remember this sort of B storyline from a few years ago where Alexa Bliss and Braun Strowman were a tag team, and there was some kind of romantic undertones there as well. And it's like, do you remember this? It's like, yeah, vaguely. It's like, oh well, we're going to turn it into a big storyline now, so you better sort of start watching old footage of that tag team classic that we did a few years ago. It just feels like a very weak way to do it, but yeah, I agree. It would be weird to kind of go the full kind of Sister Abigail route because that wouldn't make any kind of logical sense, I guess, from a storyline perspective. But then, yeah, to have a kind of Alexa Bliss in that damsel in distress sort of role would feel kind of uneasy as well, I think.
Dan, so one final question I've got to ask you. I don't think we've talked about this for a long time, especially since WWE Backstage got cancelled. I think you know where I'm going. What do you think is going on with CM Punk?
No, I to be honest, I haven't really been sort of paying too much attention. I didn't watch a lot of the sort of backstage stuff. I think it's just going to be always one of those like ongoing talking points. I think a few people I've seen have done videos about why it's still possible that he might join another company, like AEW would be the most obvious one. I think the most likely outcome for him, if he is ever going to be in the wrestling business again, is I think he will probably come back into the WWE fold somehow. I don't see him joining another company personally. I don't think he would sort of I think maybe kind of he's been sitting on the sidelines for this time, kind of thinking, would it be worth joining something like AEW? Because I think the last thing he wants is to join a wrestling project that's just going to fail in a few years. So I don't know. What do you think? What are your thoughts on
that? Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think he sort of, the word seems to be that he sort of priced himself out of a return to professional wrestling. He seems to be asking for a lot of money, and I don't think either company seems to be willing to give him that lofty a sum. Although if I were AEW, I'd strongly consider it because he'd give them such a massive credibility boost.
You know, it's just I think like the question is whether it's worth it, because I think what CM Punk can give you is that initial sort of shock value of like, oh wow, it's him in this position, and what's this going to mean overall for wrestling. But I think long term, I think maybe we've gone past the point where the CM Punk can really give you that much of a return on your investment. It's obviously going to be shocking to see him appear anywhere because it's been such a accepted thing for so long that he's not going to come back to wrestling, and if he ever does, it is going to be quite impactful. But I don't know, like I love the CM Punk character. I really enjoyed his work in the sort of 2011 CM Punk thing, but like, you know, sort of 9 years on from that, I just don't really see how he would help AEW that much.
Well, I mean, I think the hope would be that he'd get enough eyeballs on your product so that you can sort of give some of the rub to one of your homegrown performers like an MJF or somebody like that.
But do you think he would have the ability to maybe like increase the viewer figures overall of wrestling, or do you think he would just be someone who would take even more viewers away from the WWE? Like, do you think he would kind of get, you know, lapsed fans back into the product?
I don't know. I think he certainly would get a few lapsed fans back into the product, because I think there are a lot of lapsed fans who do have like some nostalgia for Punk because they did sort of check back in during his run in 2011 because they were all really impressed by that quote-unquote pipe bomb promo. But yeah, then I mean, but if you were AEW, I mean, you don't mind getting viewers from WWE, right? So I think that certainly would work for them.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and I think if AEW really is this sort of arena where you are given that creative control to do what you like, I think, yeah, I guess I would trust Punk to do it properly. I think a lot of the frustrations around the Summer of Punk storyline were that it was this brilliant sort of initial concept that just wasn't seen through to the way it should have been. The kind of things that he said on his podcast with Colt Cabana, the kind of things he was suggesting that were being shot down. If you gave him that level of freedom to do that with another company, then yeah, potentially that would work quite well. And I think he has enough of an understanding of popular culture maybe to maybe give AEW some of that credibility in terms of appealing not just to the sort of insular like internet fan base, but people who used to watch wrestling back in the day as well. It's possible.
But I think his days as sort of like a full-time in-ring competitor are done. Like, if he did come back, it would have to be, like he makes a surprise return. You do like the 4-5 week cycle leading up to a pay-per-view, and then he disappears and comes back a year later or something.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I think he would prefer that anyway. I think he's long past the point where he wants a kind of full-time schedule from wrestling anyway. But I think, yeah, if you like, how many dream matches can you really get out of AEW though? I mean, because like we've seen Punk and Jericho a number of times. I know it's a different platform now, but we've seen that back in WWE so often. I don't think I'd be that excited by it. Maybe Punk versus MJF would be a good feud, especially. But yeah, I don't know. Like Punk Omega, like is that really going to get that much interest from people? I don't know.
Definitely not. I think that'd be a waste of time. I think MJF would definitely be the one because he can sort of talk down to Punk and take digs at his failures in the UFC and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. I just think MJF is just on a completely other level at the moment. I think he's
so good.
Some interesting talking points there. And I think we've sort of given our unique take on the current wrestling industry at the moment. We're probably not saying the most popular things at the moment, but at least we're being honest with what we think.
Yeah, I mean, if we come across as two crusty old men who can't get along with the times, then so be it, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't really want to be seen as someone who can get along with the current times, I think.
That's fair.
But yeah, thanks, Ania, and again, hope you are staying safe out there, and all the best to you and your family.
Yeah, stay safe, everyone. Best regards to all of you.